One of the most futuristic feeling phones I've used in the past year doesn't have the best looking display or the latest chip or outstanding battery life or even a particularly great camera. The device I'm talking about has been Moto's flagship clamshell since it launched in the summer of 2023, and with a 2024 refresh now on the cards, the price has taken a significant dip down to $649 of your favorite currency. So with a year of context behind us and a new lower price, it's time to see how the Razr is shaping up. I'm Alex Dobie, this is Pocket Now, and this is the Motorola Razr Plus After the Buzz. So the many things I still love about this device, I think the design is front and center. It isn't as crazy thin as some of the large form factor foldables we've seen from other brands like Honor, but it's still significantly thinner opened out than much of the flat competition. The metal frame is curved, comfortable to hold, and less chunky feeling than just about any Samsung foldable. And the matte finish of the frosted glass segment down below here adds a pleasing contrast with the outer display. If you've watched any of my other content on Pocket Now or XDA, you'll know I haven't exactly been using this for a full year. Instead, this Razr unit has been with my friend and colleague Ryan Thomas Shaw. So this phone does have almost a full year of wear and tear on it, just not from me. And I've got to say, it's held up pretty well. I see some minor scuffs on the matte portion of the outer body, but the glass of the outer display looks fine, as does the more fragile internal OLED. Good to see, because that definitely hasn't been the case for every previous generation of Razr. Needless to say, being a fairly recent foldable, it does fold and open out completely flat. There's definitely a crease in the screen if you go looking for it, but I haven't found this particularly bothersome at all. It's a foldable, there's going to be a crease, I think you just need to live with that. So open it up and you're greeted by an extra tall 6.9-inch Full HD Plus OLED with a lanky aspect ratio of 22:9, giving you extra space for scrolling through emails or tweets. On paper, it's a 165Hz panel, but in practice in day-to-day scrolling, it usually maxes out at 120. It's a fine-looking screen, though a little oversaturated at times on the default setting. Unfortunately, the vibrance option here is all or nothing. As is often the case with foldables, the inner display is fairly reflective, but at a peak brightness level of 1400 nits, it's still reasonably visible in daylight. All of this stuff is pretty much in line with much of the foldable competition though, as is the case with this fold's hinge and crease. It's a little looser when opening up than some of the foldables I've used, but it doesn't really bother me all that much. When it's closed, you get what's probably the most functional outer display in any small form factor foldable. Now, I really wasn't 100% sold on the design of this outer screen when I first used this phone back in mid-2023. The irregular border at the top, the cutouts down below for the camera protrusions, I don't know, it just looked a little off to me, especially the constant need to work around the blocked areas of content if you like to use your apps full screen. But returning to it a year later and with the benefit of more time with Samsung's foldables, I think these are minor issues. And although many apps are definitely not optimized for this combination of size and aspect ratio, it just about works well enough when you need to quickly check directions or skip ahead in a podcast or YouTube video. And I think better support for this aspect ratio and form factor is just as much on app developers and Google as it is on Motorola. So in that respect, software is one of this phone's greatest strengths even a year after launch, and that's mostly down to the clean Android UI you get on the inner screen and the optimized, thoughtful, pint-sized experience that populates that outer panel. Like Samsung, it centers around a little Rolodex-like widget panel for quick, glanceable access to things like your weather and calendar. But unlike the current Galaxy Z Flip series, it's easier to jump into a full screen app and juggle between apps and access your notification shade plus quick settings on the Razr. Moto's software here feels like a lot more thought and care has gone into it versus some other foldables where they've just thought as far as widgets and then kind of stopped. But just as much as software design is a major strength of this phone, software support is also one of its greatest weaknesses. When I picked up the Razr again in June 2024 and installed the couple of updates that were waiting for me, I at first thought that something was wrong, because surely no flagship phone from the past year could still be running Android 13, first launched in 2022? But nope, here we are right up to date on that almost 2-year-old platform version right as Android 15 is rapidly approaching stable status. I guess to be fair to Motorola, it's been more fastidious about rolling out those bi-monthly security updates. That is arguably more important for the day-to-day security and safety of everything you do on your phone. But this phone was not cheap when it launched. It carried a $1,000 price tag back in 2023, and to still have not received a single platform update a year on is pathetic for a manufacturer of Motorola's size. If this is how slow the updates are rolling out when it's new, then who knows how long you'll be waiting to get those 2 further promised OS updates going into 2025 and 2026. This is exactly the kind of thing that gives Moto its bottom-rung F-tier reputation when it comes to updates. Moto's other weakness in this phone has to do with photography. Now, I can look past some of this phone's photographic deficit now that it costs $650. Let's be honest, you paid that much for a phone, and unless it's a Pixel, chances are you're not going to be taking the very best photos you've ever seen. But still, as fun as this form factor is, with features like this smiley face animation to attract the attention of kids and pets, the Razer Plus's camera system is probably its biggest hardware compromise. You've got 2 tiny sensors and an ultra-wide setup that only ekes out a little bit of extra field of view at the cost of a lot of detail and dynamic range. Maybe I'm being too harsh here, but it just feels like this is like a toy camera where, okay, you'll get some fun shots, and especially that hallmark of foldables, taking selfies with the rear cameras, but really don't expect it to match up the quality of the Samsung competition. And that's especially true for video, where distortion around the edges of the frame is common, even at a modest walking pace. That's the kind of thing that almost all high-end phones can deal with, and I think this is the biggest single area that Motorola needs to address with the upcoming launch of the 2024 Razer Plus. The other thing that also needs some work, I think, is battery life. Now again, this is something that all small form factor foldables can struggle with. As such, during my second stint with the Razer, I've set it to use the dark theme most of the time to save power. But even then, there's a limit to how far a 3800 mAh battery is going to get you, powering a big, fast screen and a Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 processor. Speaking of which, while that processor was already a year old when the Razer Plus launched, it hasn't aged too badly over the past 12 months. Unless you're doing a lot of heavy gaming, for the average user, day-to-day performance is going to be more or less matching what you get from a more up-to-date Qualcomm chip. However, when your battery capacity is so constrained in a smaller foldable like this, the extra efficiency counts, and so I'm really hoping for a more up-to-date 8 Gen 3 in this thing's successor. As it stands, the 2023 Razer Plus is still a one-day phone at best. And on heavier travel days, you may want to think about a midday refill or limit yourself to the smaller outer panel to cut down on power consumption. Again, it's not unique in that respect, but hopefully we will see some improvement with the next generation. So a year on, there's still an awful lot I like about the 2023 Razer Plus, and in a lot of ways it still feels like a phone from the future. It looks and feels great, more streamlined than what you'll see in the latest foldables from Samsung. Performance-wise, it does everything I need it to, and the secondary outer display experience is second to none in my opinion. As a new generation of Razer approaches then, I'm hoping to see a slightly brighter, less reflective display, a big bump in camera performance, and hopefully some modest improvements to battery life as well, whether through brute forcing it with the addition of a larger cell or just the efficiency gains of that newer chip. But as much as Moto gets right about its software and the outer display experience, as well as vintage features like Moto Display on the main screen, it really needs to up its game when it comes to Android software updates. Because the promise of 3 years of new OS versions rings pretty hollow if you're still waiting on the first one more than a year after launch. But even with those handful of complaints, I still think the Razer Plus is a proposition worth considering, especially at its newly reduced price point. $650 for hardware this good that still has another 2 years of admittedly slow software support ahead of it is not a bad deal at all. Just be aware of what you're getting into with that somewhat subpar camera experience, and maybe also don't expect the earth when it comes to battery longevity. That's it for now. If you have a Razer Plus or Razer 40 Ultra, hit the comments and let us know how you've been getting on with it, and stick around and subscribe for more on the 2024 refresh of this phone coming very soon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.